Good morning. This is second class for the worldview and Christian worldview. So let's have a little review on last lesson, the end part of last lesson, and we'll continue with the new subjects. We have tried to define and conceptualize the worldview as we know in an academic way. And there has been a discussion about a brief elaboration of the concepts. So let's go over these elaboration briefly. And let's see. Worldview. It should be a coherent belief system, and also it provides us with a rationalized answers, and then it's an integrated paradigm, and also it is guided lifestyle. And in addition to that, the worldview that we practice and we conceive, it has a distinctive community. So there is a certain community that supports a similar or the same worldview, and they are called a society. And also it produces a dominant culture. Dominant culture meaning everyone kind of has a sense, an idea. Even though they do not say it, they are aware of these cultures. And culture is learned without really acknowledging it. Okay? Then we would have a ultimate life view, which is the core of any worldview. So when we talk about a worldview, it comes down to the answer. What is life about? What is the best life or good life? Or what is the right thing to do and what is not right thing to do? So these are again the elements of worldview, and any worldview should contain these elements. Okay, so we have looked on each one of them into details. We have discussed this coherent belief system. As it is elaborate or written there, coherent, that's a characteristic. That's determining factor for a good worldview of a society. It has to be coherent. If it's like a fragmented or separated, or it is not connected, then it's not coherent. Coherent means it's together, it's related. One explains the other, and that the other also explains this. So it has a mutual explanation and understanding for another. So any worldview, good worldview or working worldview has to have a coherency, and that's one of the major character of a belief system. A belief system is a system of the belief about the reality. Again, no person sees a reality as it is. No one can be subjective about the reality, which means everyone is objective, that means that everyone has their own opinion or understanding or perception about the given reality. So reality is there as an object, and it doesn't move. And it's there, the same reality, but people sees them in a very different, sometimes really different perspective. So that's a belief system. You don't actually see it, you believe about the reality. So that is a belief system. It is a system because somehow, in some way, it is all organized. It's put together. Sometimes it's intentional, but sometimes, many times, you do not even know that you are organizing your belief system. If this belief system is fragmented, you have problem, you have trouble. You have trouble in explaining who you are, what the reality is, how you are related to this world. For example, marriage, you have to have a certain belief about the marriage. Some people believe it is to produce the children in ancient days, and sometimes it is to gain a labor force by getting married. And for the old society, the ladies, women, did not have a position in a society. So for them, the marriage is the security, it's a safety, and it's provision. So by getting married, you are going to have a more certainty about your future. So that's very different perspective. On the other hand, the husband is thinking, I'm gaining an extra labor to do the farmings and to raise the livestock and to take care of the home chores. So this is very different perspective, even though they are getting married at the same culture with the same expectations and everything, but in reality they are perceiving this marriage in a different manner. So thus they have a different perspective, and somehow you have to come to a system. And the marriage kind of explains what the life is about. If it's about the security, your whole decisions, all the decisions should be based on the issue of providing security. Usually as a financial security, that you are able to eat and sleep and you have a place to come as a home. And that's a basic need, basic primary need. And most worldviews try to provide that security of your survival. And it try to explain the reality in those ways. So that's kind of a belief system that we are going to talk about. And next, so thus, by providing a system of belief or belief system, one is giving answers to himself or to the community or to others. So it is rationalized answers. I told you that in last class, it is rationalized because this person say it's the right answer, but the other person may say no, it is not. But for the person who's saying it is true, for him or her, that's already rationalized, meaning it persuaded that person. So worldview, whatever you have, what kind of worldview you have, it doesn't matter. It has to persuade you to believe it as true. If we have if you have constant doubts about these answers, then that worldview is not yours. That is not yours. And there comes a time in your life around, usually as a teenage and in early 20s, you keep asking these questions. The question basically is the answers that were told by the culture, by your parents, by your teachers, and by even your religious leaders. Is it true? And you're going to ask that question, and you have to have the answer, yes, this is true. And it should be able to persuade you, and thus you are going to persuade others. So it is rationalized answers. You kind of tell yourself, this is true, and you begin to believe in it. And once it becomes a belief, it is hard to change, because a belief, it's not just happening in your head as a knowledge, but it comes down to your heart. It passes through your mind and thinking, and it is processed, and it resides in your heart. So once it becomes your heart matters, that's a belief, and it is difficult to change. And in the life process, there are some unanswered questions. These are the issues and the problems that's gonna bother you. And it's better for us to have more rationalized answers or good answers than not to have any answers. If you don't have answers, you are confused. Once you're confused, and your life is not gonna be that stable. So many young people today are troubled because they do not have a coherent and congruent and rationalized answers. And we are constantly asking these questions, and many are afraid to ask these questions because people assume that you're mature enough to have your own answers. But matter of fact is that majority of people kind of assume that they do have rationalized answers, but they do not really believe in it. So people think that they have answers, and sometimes they brag about it and talk about it and be loud about it, but in reality, in truth, they do not have these answers. And Christianity, or any other religion in matter of fact, is trying to provide the very fundamental and basic frame of works, or the paradigm, or the worldview, or answers to the life questions. And all other answers begin from there. That's why the religion is key to a culture, or key to a person's life, because it tries to provide the ultimate answers to the ultimate questions. Those ultimate questions usually has to do with the world that you are not be able to see. The spirit, the life beyond, the question of death, why do we need to die, and the question of sin and guilt. These are the fundamental questions, and the worldview provides that rationalized answers. Many cultures, you kind of become a passive person who are just accepting and receiving these answers that are given by the authority, whether it's a spiritual authority, whether it's a government, whether it's a school. They are authorities and they are providing you with these answers. And our job, and as a responsible person, you are to evaluate and examine and test these answers that are given. And many are not bothering enough to question these answers that are given, and you just become a passive participant of a culture. When you just become a participant of a culture or even politics, then you are not going to become a changing agent. The reason that we are studying further every day, just taking these kind of classes, college level classes and the graduate level classes, and even doing the doctoral classes, is because you want to become an agent of the change for the better, change for the human generation, not just for yourself. You want to contribute to your community and help the community to become a better community than yesterday. If you are doing that, and that our life is worth living. So that's basically what the Christianity is teaching. You are born to serve others. You're not born to serve yourself or your ego or your desire, but we are born to serve others so we can make them happy. And by making others happy and better, then you feel happy yourself. And that becomes a reward for our existence. So that's kind of answers that Christianity is trying to give. But again, the worldview is integrated paradigm. I explained what the paradigm is in the last class. It's basically, it's like a house. And when you have a house, there's a roof, and there are walls, and there are foundation. This is basically the paradigm about the house. And there are rooms, and there are sometimes kitchen, and there are bathrooms. This is the basic things. And any household, if it's a normal average household, you have these things. So that's kind of a paradigm. So everyone has a paradigm about house, and most cultures agree that a house has to have a roof and a wall to protect them from the rain and wind and the cold and heat. And then it should have a rooms to sleep on, and should have a kitchen so you can prepare something to eat. And that's basically, it provides the basic needs for a family or an individual. So that's kind of a paradigm that we have about the house. So paradigm is a basic mind map. It's a basic idea that commonly accepted by a society or by a culture. So in that sense, paradigm is more like, it can be equated to the worldview, even though it's not exactly the same thing, but it's pretty much similar. So worldview and paradigm is kind of interchangeable. And these paradigms are is kind of determined, it's decided. And unless it becomes a solid belief for you, it's not yet a paradigm. Paradigm is something that you already accepted as your belief and within the belief system, and it integrates with other belief that you have. So that's paradigm, and it has to be one system integrated, and it has to be consistent doesn't change from day to day. If something changes from day to day, it's not a belief yet. You're confused. You're still undecided. And if that's the case, that's not a paradigm yet. Paradigm is something that is consistent and constant. It does not change. And if that's the case, many people today do not have a paradigm or paradigms. Their belief system is very changing. It's not solid. And it has to be holistic. Holistic. Holistic means it has to include everything, every matter. If it's true to the part A, but if it is not true to part B of your life, there's part A is also reality and existence. B is also your existence and your reality, your life. But if it only applies to the part A or section A or life A, and then it does not apply to the life B or dominant or dominion, then it does not integrate, which means it's not holistic. So what I'm trying to say is, for example, Christianity, it should explain and it should have the implication or the meaning or connected to every part of your life, every domain of your life. If it doesn't, it remains as a religion. That's how I distinguish between the religion and worldview. So for me, Christianity is rather an worldview. It explains everything about your life. It tries to give a rationalized answer to every questions in your life, rather than just religious matters. Usually the religious matters, it deals with life and death, and the salvation, and the eternity, and the spirit or spiritual. But I use the spiritual in a different definition. So, but the spirit, death, life, and life beyond, these are the subject that's limited to the religion. So in that sense, Christianity is not a religion. It does, not only tries, but it does explain every matters of your life. Whether it's a job, whether it's a marriage, whether it's your personal struggle, Bible gives answers to all these questions, and it kind of directs you to make a positive and healthy decisions about your life. So holistic means it includes everything. Again, guided lifestyle. Because it is holistic, a worldview tries to explain what the life is about and how you should live your life. And see, but it says guided lifestyle. But let's define the lifestyle first. Lifestyle is a way of living, or ways of living. How you live your life, how you dress, what kind of food you eat, and what kind of houses you build. So lifestyle has to do much with the culture. Culture is a big boundary of your lifestyle, but lifestyle is more of individual favor or flavor. You decide your own lifestyle. So within one culture, there could be many different lifestyles. But some culture does not allow diverse lifestyle. But some cultures, for example, in America, you have really different or diverse lifestyles. But in some cultures, you are very limited, restricted to a certain way of life. I wouldn't say, I wouldn't give an example, but you know what I'm talking about. There are some so-called religious nations who are trying to impose a certain lifestyle, how you dress and how you should not dress, and it gives what to do and what to do not to do, and limits lifestyle. So that's the lifestyle we are talking about, and that's closely again connected to the culture that you are living. It's guided lifestyle. Guided means there are certain restrictions, and there is something called a norm. Norm is acceptable, generally acceptable lifestyle. And people does have certain regulations, so it is regulatory, and there comes with a certain consequences if you do not follow those regulations. It is sometimes called custom, sometimes it's called tradition, sometimes it is called law, sometimes it is called instructions, and sometimes it is called a rule. So law, rule, instructions, these things try to regulate your life. And in Western culture, they believe less regulation is better. But in Eastern culture, not today, but used to be, they believe it's better to have more regulations. So more regulation, what it means is that you can predict the behavior of the people, which provides more sense of security. So it has to do with the security of a culture and your community, your society. So for the sake of the community, people were asked to sacrifice their individual choices or freedoms. That's how it is. But once you reduce the regulations, it is much difficult to predict the future or behaviors of the people. And you have to think a lot more as a government, as a society. There are so many factors to consider. And you have to have more laws, more legal things. That's why America has a lot of those laws, and they have more lawyers than any other nations or culture. So this kind of explains, once you give freedom of choice to the people and less regulation for the lifestyle and the culture, then it becomes chaotic in Eastern understanding. But in the Western culture, they say it has to do with the tolerance, it is diversity. So if you favor diversity to the guided, regulated kind of lifestyle, then you also have issues. But every individual is more valued than the community in general. So the decisions in these cultures, less regulated cultures, decisions are made based on, is it going to promote more of an individual freedom or it is not. So the decisions or the policy of government goes toward providing more of individual freedom and the choices. See, this is kind of very different worldview that result in different decisions, whether it's an individual, whether it's a group, or whether it's a government. So, worldview has to do with everything that we live by. That's why the worldview is important. And not only, so I explained is how this lifestyle, even the guided lifestyle, manages a system and predictability I spoke about. Okay? So, next. As a result of a guided lifestyle and culture and regulations and certain belief system and coherent, these paradigms and the culture, it produces a distinctive community. Distinctive means different from another or other. So A and the C are two distinctive, and the dog and the cat are two distinctive animals. So distinctive means they are different. And it's a community. So community means unity. Means common. Okay, common, and the unity is oneness. So community is something has to do with oneness. Even though there are many thousands of people, they have something in common. Maybe they live within a certain geographical boundary. For example, city of Los Angeles, that's a community because those who are, there are people who live within the city of Los Angeles, and they become a community simply because they live within a given boundary of a territory. So that can be an example. Or ethnicity, because they are Koreans, they kind of gather together. Even within the Los Angeles city, there is something called Koreatown, because they are Koreans gathered together, and they feel common, they feel unity. So it builds a community, and they share not only the ethnicity and the geographical thingy, but also they share the common worldview. So the common worldview brings the people together. They share the same belief or similar belief. So Christians, even though they do not live within the same geographical boundary, even though they do not share the same ethnicity, they share the same worldview. So Christians bound together as a community. So for that sense, Christians doesn't have to live together in a given city or given town. They can be apart, but they are still a community. This is how strong a worldview is. So it's a group of people who believe in the same worldview, and they do have shared destiny. That's a kind of key to a community that we are going to talk about, because worldview, it dominates your destiny. The worldview says this is our destiny. This is your destiny. That means destiny means the reason for your existence. Destiny means the end, how you're going to end up. So if you're going to end up together, that builds a strong sense of bond, connection. So that's key, a key to a community. Now, distinctive. Distinctive, it has the element of that uniqueness, and it even shares the diversity. So diversity within the diversity. That means even though there are certain diversities within a community, it is different from the diversities that are existing in other communities. So even the diversities, the differences, you share together. So those diversities still has a certain limitations or boundaries. And that uniqueness, that kind of provides you with the uniqueness. For example, food. Let me give you an example of food. For example, spaghetti. There are probably 2,000 or more different kind of spaghettis, and the pastas, right? Spaghetti and pastas in Italy. And so that's the kind of diversity. But if you compare that to the food in Thailand, for example, they have something similar to the spaghetti, but their brand or their diversity is limited. So that kind of noodles and spaghetti in Thailand is different from the noodles and the pastas from Italy. So this is kind of a diversity example and distinctive community. Okay? So there is something that's exclusive, and that difference causes hostility. That's another thing about the culture. When you share certain things together, when you see something that is very different, again, distinctive from yours, many people in general develop a sense of hostility. They do not accept, they do not favor, they don't think it is favorable to them, and they try to go against it or fight against it. So that's hostility. Sometimes it even brings a resistance. And for example, in Korean history, there was a belief among the people you should not cut your hair that were given by your parents, and that is against the norm, and you should never do that. And there came to the time and age under Japanese rule that everyone was ordered to cut their hairs short, especially the guys, male. And there were resistance against that order. So that's hostility against the change. And it happens within, not only within a culture, within the history, but it does happen within a person. Change of a religious belief, that would be one of the major changes that may happen in a person's life. Even though you say that I do not have any religion, you still have a certain belief system, the worldview that you grew up with, and you are influenced by it. If you do not go to the Buddhist temple yourself, if you were born and raised in Thailand, you are most likely thinking in Buddhist way, whether you like it or not. And there comes a time that you are going to question yourself about your belief, like I said. And then if it's something about your religion, then many people have strong resistance against changing of their belief. Not only it applies to the belief, the religion, but scientific belief also matters in that way. A distinctive community, even though you're not aware of it, either you belong to a community of evolutionists or you belong to the community of creationists. Not only Christianity, it's not just the Christianity that talks about the creation. Islam, Jews, and many folk religions, the old folk religions, even the many shamanists, they believe in creation rather than evolution. And there are, not the majority, minority of people who call themselves rational and scientific, who believe. It's not the scientific fact, in matter of fact. It's belief system. They believe in the evolution, the theory of evolution. It has never been proved. It's still a theory, but they strongly believe in that. So that's kind of creates a distinctive community. So we understand what the distinctive community is about. So the worldview, it dominates a culture and it brings a community together. That's how strong a worldview is. That's how important a worldview is. And again, a given worldview, it produces a culture. It brings a culture. Or you are born into a culture with the dominant cultural elements, and you're raised, and you grew up in that culture, and that culture dominates you. So either way, the culture is dominant, and it dominates a person's life. It dominates certain ethnic groups, and it dominates certain geographical gatherings. So a culture is a very strong element in understanding a worldview. By studying a culture, you come to understand people's worldview. That's why it is important to understand the culture, whether you're Christian or not, whether you're an artist or a scientist. You are dominated by your culture. No one can live apart from a culture. Even as an individual, if you live within an island, just like a Robinson Crusoe in that story, he developed his own culture because you interact not only with the people, but you interact basically with the nature, the ecology and environment. By interacting with those environment and the natural elements, and you develop a culture, tools, the way of living, the lifestyle, dressing, and the food. All these are the cultural elements. So the culture is created by people. So when there is a people, whether it's one person or two person or more, they create or develop a culture. And culture is produced or developed by utilizing or using the given context. This context is again another big term that we are going to discuss in relation to the worldview. The context is people, as a history, and it's a nature and an environment, and it's your society. These are the context. So the context and culture kind of, it overlaps in a certain way, but it's not the same. And culture is developed through interacting with the context. And the context, again, it affects and influences the culture. So it's kind of mutual with even though it's two different entities. Then ecology is pretty similar to the context, but ecology is actually a part of a context. And your ecology is in nature, it's a geography that you live in, whether you live in a kind of a desert kind of climate, or whether you live in mountains, and whether you live in the seashore. That makes a difference. That produces a different culture. So people who are living in farmland and the mountains and in a sea village, they develop a different culture, different lifestyle. So that explains, right? Even the climate. Of course, climate is a key factor in making of a culture. If you live in a Mediterranean climate, just like California, people are more relaxed, and there's not much difference between summer and winter. It's pretty warm and not that cold. So, and that dry. It provides, you react to interact with that kind of climate and produce a certain distinctive culture. And that culture then dominates you. And shared narrative. Okay, there, shared narrative. This is another key element that many people do not acknowledge or consider when considering a culture. A culture is produced by that shared narrative. Whether it's a myth, whether it's your history, written or oral, or whether it's your family tradition that were told to you by your parents or your grandparents. These are shared narratives. Narratives for a human being, human generation, is very important. The narratives is a very critical part of worldview, because the way you learn a worldview and culture is mainly through narratives. Today, in modern days, there are something called modern narratives. I did not write there, but modern narratives are the movies and dramas, the music. These are the modern narratives. See, think about it. How great influence these things, the media, has to the younger people. So media is modern narratives. And it is shared by a certain group of people who shared a certain kind of a worldview, which also again influences some other people to change their worldviews. See, the key word here is a change of worldview. Whether you realize it or not, people are influenced by these narratives, shared narratives. And more people shares the narratives, then they can bring the change to more change or greater change, more impact to other group of people. For example, the BTS, it's not just the music, it's not just the boys dancing and singing. It's the narrative. They are producing these narratives to the modern culture. And these narratives, people listen and hear and they accept their narratives with the music. And they share the common worldview. And they create and develop a certain kind of culture, a very unique, distinctive culture. And that, again, dominates them. So it's kind of an ongoing process. By listening to the narratives, they become one of them, so-called army. And this army tells a story, and then it dominates not only themselves and influence and brings a change to the lives of others. So that's a strong kind of worldview they are creating. I'm not trying to make a judgment on whether it's a good narrative or not. Everyone is making their own judgment. And usually the religion and the way of dressing and food were the most dominant element of a culture. So nowadays, there's the narrative is more stronger than these food and other dressing, way of dressings and all the language. So narrative is above language. Whether you speak English, Korean, Chinese, there's some narratives above that. And they share those narratives. So that narrative is a key to a dominant culture. Dominant. See, there are certain level of culture. There's a family, there's a tribe, and there's a personal. So personal is the most micro unit of a culture. So you have your own personal culture, your culture. That's very distinctive, different from any other people. Then there's a family. Your family have your own distinctive culture that kind of only your family shares. Then there's a tribe. There's not tribe anymore in a modern society, but see, look at your company that you work in, and at your school. These are considered at the level of tribe in ancient days. So ancient tribe is more like today's school and workplace and your group of friends. See, so these are, you're creating a modern kind of tribe because they share the same narrative. So narrative again. And they do have shared norms. With a shared narrative comes a certain standard, a certain ways of living. So I gave an example of BTS. These people know all the songs that BTS ever recorded. And they can sing without looking at the verses. I mean, it's in their head and heart. So not only they share the narrative, they have certain way of doing things. See? And those are called norms. And a religion, for example, for Islam, there are 5 prayers. Then that's the behavior that you have to follow, and as a shared norms. Everyone who call themselves a faithful Islam or Muslim, they do pray 5 times a day. And of course, they do have a shared dominated by their belief. They do act in a certain way, not because the acting of a certain way makes them to belong to a certain group. That's one major reason. But beyond that, behind that, there's a certain belief that makes them to do certain actions and behaviors and so-called norms and repeat the narratives. So that's the belief. So the belief dominates them, whether we realize or not. It is the belief that are going to dominate our lives, and that's how strong and significant our worldview is. Okay. These cultures and the paradigm and the worldview are learned and it's reinforced. Okay, there are 2 aspects. First is learned. Sometimes it's learned by your own effort. Sometimes it is learned by without your effort. It happens, right? And if you're thrown into a culture and if you're born into it, then you learn without even realizing that you're learning. And when you become a certain age with the so-called self, ego, then you are reinforced to follow a certain standard, a certain norm, and forced to believe in certain things. And parents tell you to do this and not to do that. Sometimes it's just a family thing, but many times it's the culture that your parents, your mom and dad represent. So they do not say I'm representing my culture, and because of that you have to do this and you don't do that. But they don't say that. But actually they are representing the culture they are in, and their belief, and they are forcing their belief to their children. That's how the culture is. How the culture is sustained. How ethnic group or nation survived. So it's a matter of survival to force a certain belief system into their children and children's children that keeps you as a coherent, a unified group of people, as a community, as a bound society. So that's a survival skill. It's a matter of survival. So that's why it is reinforced. So reinforced does not always mean a bad thing. Many times it has a good implication. Then, because of that, usually most of the people who are participating in a given culture, they are usually passive participant, meaning they sit there and they receive this culture coming to them, and they learn and they are reinforced, they accept without making any judgment or resistance. And there comes time that you have to make a decision yourself, whether you're going to accept that culture that were given to you or not. And that there's that struggle, usually in your teenage or early 20s. So people go through that. And most people decide to become a participant passive. They do not actively go against or resist the culture. See, if you resist the culture or go against culture, then you become an ugly duckling. You know that ugly duckling, right? The story of 거위가 뭐지? A story of not a duck, but who happened to live amongst the ducklings, the baby ducks, and then eventually he finds out that he's not one of them. See, that happens. Even though you were raised as a Korean or Chinese, and so there are people who does not feel, who doesn't belong to this given culture, and they have very difficult time in living in that culture. See, that happens a lot without us realizing. But many decide just to submit themselves to that given culture. And ultimate life view. So this is a very the critical element of any worldview. So life view and the worldview. See, it shares the view. And the core of worldview is how you perceive your life. As an individual and as a community. And everyone has a different perspective and answers and the guesses against the question. So life view is how one interprets his and her or her life. It's not something that is given. I'm not talking about some answers that were given, even though those answers were given to you and telling you this is your life, should be, and this is your life's meaning. Right? The culture and your parents or your teachers or your religious leaders going to tell you this. But you have to make your own decision whether to accept that answer as your answer, or you're going to do the search for your own answers. So there are basically two different kind of people in whole world. Those people who are just accepting the given answers without question, without examining, without testing it. And there are those who are going to ask the question to the given answers and try to examine it, try to test it, and to see if indeed these answers are true. So here comes the question of truth. Is it true? Or is it a half truth? Or is it false? And unless you ask the question, that very question, whether is it true, then you're never going to find out. Not only you're going to ask the question, you have to do the work yourself, because no one's going to do the work for you. So this is something that you have to do yourself. You have to search, you have to research, and you have to examine, and you have to evaluate, you have to test and experience yourself and make a very rational and balanced decision about the question. So how one interprets about your life? You have to be the center and the subject of the interpretation, not someone who is interpreting your life. So many times people are satisfied with someone else's interpretation of your life. Right? At the end, I mean, it is your life, ultimately. It's not yours. No one's going to live your life for you. And us in the, Far East or Northeastern Asian culture, dominated by the Chinese Confucian philosophy, people are very passive. They believe in something called the given destiny. And because of that, the answers, the interpretation given by the society and the culture was dominating their lives, the history even. And in the 21st century, we face, whether you're Chinese, Korean, or Japanese, we are struggling against the vast history, thousand years of history. That's a shared narrative that I talked about. This shared narrative is so strong, it dominates the whole culture. And it is very difficult for us individuals to go against that kind of interpretation that were given throughout the history for many years and many generations. And it seems almost impossible to go against. But in 20th century and 21st century, we are facing these changes. So you have right and the responsibility even to ask yourself the answers, the interpretations were given to me by the generations of this shared narrative. Is it true? So the question is meaning of your existence. Why are you here on earth? Is it for just wealthy life with a lot of money and the comfort and the power and the fame? Is that why you're here on earth? Is it going to provide you with the happiness and gratitude? And when everything is over, are you going to say, I lived well? So that's the kind of question, meaning of existence. What is the meaning of your existence? And interpretation of reality. Is it, the word, I'm sure that you're feeling that you're the center of this world, whether you realize it or not. There are times that you stop and thinking, okay, I'm existing here, I see the world, and so it exists for me, but is it true? And the reality that you see and you touch and feel, well, what implication, what significance those reality has to you? That's the kind of question. And how you interpret your family and your society, your culture, and the money and the wealth. These are the reality that you see and experience. And you have to have a certain standard or the interpretation of that reality. And ultimate means the eternal end, the very, very end, the final. So death and beyond, that's the question. And the final destiny, what's going to happen to your body, your mind, and your spirit? And all the spirituality includes all these questions. So people have a different spirituality, and that means they have their own different interpretation. And again, many times people just passively accept the question, the answers were given. And when you do not have the answers to this ultimate life view, I can safely say that you do not have a worldview, because this life view is very core of the whole worldview that we are going to examine. And if you are missing that core, it's like a car with an empty gas tank. Even though it's a new one, very brand new car, if you don't put the gas in, it's not going to run. It's not going to operate. You cannot drive it. It's the same thing with a worldview. This is very, very the key to any culture, any worldview. So you are to examine and ask yourself, do I have this ultimate life view? And the most religions deals with this very question. And if it's limited to providing only the ultimate life view, then it stays as a religion. But Christianity, fortunately, for me at least, it gives the answer to other questions as well. But still, going back to this key question, this ultimate life view. What is life about? Why are you here? And who are you? And if you have a good answers, that's great. But if you do not have, or if your answers are still confused, then we need to do the very responsible search for the answer of this life view. And next week, we'll continue with the major subjects of the worldview. And last week, I talked about having the quiz, but the things, technically, it is not feasible to take a quiz and grade them. So we'll just forget about the quiz for this quarter of the semester, and it's probably going to be most likely going to be pass or fail kind of class. So please faithfully attend the viewing of this video, the lecture video, and make sure that you understand all the concepts and the terms and the explanation that I give. So try to watch it faithfully, and I'll see you next week. Thank you.